many people in our world believe that you only have a gut problem if you've got constipation or diarrhea or something of that sense. So help us understand how does the gut control our immune system, and how would we know if it's not doing a good job giving us a strong immune system?
Yes. Dr. Mindy in the house. All right.
I appreciate that.
The carnivore diet.
Because of what we eat.
Honestly, you've really touched my heart.
So Fast Like a Girl, it's ready for pre-order now. I hope this book changes your life the way the information has changed hundreds of thousands of women that have applied it. From the bottom of my heart, enjoy, and let's get healthy together.
I'm a huge fan of the microbiome. I really am excited about anybody who's putting out information on the microbiome, because I feel like it's not talked about enough, even though it's talked about more than ever. It's still not enough. We don't give it enough credit. And it's something that people need to be aware of. So it's interesting. You were saying that you wrote the book last year. Were you writing it last year as we were going through the pandemic?
Yeah, I think a lot of people have forgotten that we're in the midst of this epidemic, which is it's moving slower and people are not dying as fast as with COVID. But I think it's equally impactful, on what impact it has on the healthcare system and on people's health and mortality.
Talk a little bit about that, because the one thing that shocked me last year is that people thought we had a virus problem. And what I saw is we had an immune problem. Can you talk, how do we determine the difference between both, and what's your feeling on that? Did we have a viral problem, or did we have a compromised immune system problem?
Well, I would say it's the two of them coming together. Clearly this virus is something that most of the time come from animals, and will continue to increase in their danger with, the way we farm animals, it's inhumane ways of producing our meat supplies, and but they also come from encroaching on habitats of wild animals, and making this interface smaller between the wild animals and us. But there's also clearly, as we can see from the people that are most vulnerable to this virus, is a good story to be learned. It's not, not everybody got it. Not everybody had to go to the ICU, and not everybody developed the long COVID. So there's all these factors that I think have to do directly with the immune system, and the vulnerability of people. And that links it again, to the immune system in our gut, where most of it is located.
Yeah. I find it fascinating that your training is as a gastroenterologist, and yet I'm finding many people in general, but a lot of the medical profession has not acknowledged that gut problems aren't just stomach aches. They're not just constipation, that an imbalance in the gut is something bigger than that. Can you talk a little bit about that and bring our audience up to speed?
Yeah, this is definitely not being part of the curriculum, in gastroenterology, or even in medicine. Gut health, and so typically for a gastroenterologist, there's two things. There's either something you see on your endoscopy, or if it's not there, it's something what's called functional, and it's it's dismissed as something, it's not really that serious, and that has changed a little bit over time. But it's certainly not being replaced by this concept of gut health or well-being. That's not at the center of the discussion and of attention. At the same time, we've learned so much about these different systems in the gut. It's not just the digestive organ. It's not just the organ where your colon polyps and cancers grow. It's our biggest part of the immune system, biggest part of our hormonal system, has its own nervous system that is, 150 million nerve cells, and then several other cell types, and they all interact with each other, and then you add the microbiome to it. That system by itself, interaction of these various, key homeostatic systems in our body. That the health of that system, that's something that has not, received any attention really. I would say from gastroenterology or from the medical system. It will probably change now. It's been good that there has been this wave of interest and publicity and media attention. I think that is, I've talked to some colleagues that are pursuing that as sort of the same, the same concept, same philosophy that I've had in this area.
Yeah, all you have to do is go to PubMed and type in, gut and brain, gut and immune system. You can find thousands of peer-reviewed journals talking about it. And I feel like it's a topic that just really needs to be some light needs to be shed on it. And yet I think that many people in our world believe that you only have a gut problem if you've got constipation or diarrhea or something of that sense. So help us understand how does the gut control our immune system? And how would we know if it's not doing a good job giving us a strong immune system?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say that the gut controls the immune system. I made a big case in my new book about this concept of systems biology, that there's an interaction of multiple parts, and it's not one part that influences the other. It's always feedback loops, and it's really the system behavior that we're interested in. And so, yeah, I mean, just from the anatomy, there's this. 70% of our immune system is sandwiched just underneath the lining of the gut, microns away from all the microbes, and so it's in very close contact to these microbes. In a healthy gut, it's insulated from the influence of the microbes, but if anything happens to this intestinal barrier, then you get an activation of which either can stay in the gut, so you have this spatially limited immune system activation, which may not give you any symptoms at all. But if it's more severe, then it affects the tightness of the epithelial layer, the gut layer, and then microbes can get into the immune system directly, and they can get into the systemic circulation, so this is, and once that happens, once you have the signaling molecules and the actual microbes in the systemic circulation, they can go anywhere, they can go to the liver, to the fat tissue, to the brain, and can cause inflammation there, and then we have this, so it's almost like probably one of the main entry points for agents that can ultimately, for influences that can ultimately lead to this system-wide immune activation.
Would you say leaky gut is the most dangerous gut scenario that we can get inside of us?
Probably the most dangerous. There's certainly other things we can talk about that as well, but I mean, the leaky gut concept is, I still remember when the first patients told me about this word, I dismissed it. This was like 10, 15 years ago as something crazy that they had picked up from their functional medicine practitioner that has nothing to do with reality or science. And I still have not found out how this first came into existence, that certain parts of medicine practitioners came up with this idea. So yeah, in the meantime, I would say that is probably, as far as we know today, is at the core of many of our chronic health problems.
Yeah.
And I mean, then there's obviously other things, the microbes themselves produce many signaling molecules. I mean, hundreds of thousands of so-called metabolites. And from the food that we eat and from some molecules that circulate in our, in our system, like hormones, female estrogen, female sex hormones, bile acids, the microbes modify those molecules once they get into the gut, and then they're being reabsorbed. So those processes with these signaling molecules do not require leaky gut. You know, you just need the microbes that can do this.
You make it sound so simple. You just need the microbes. Aren't the microbes also struggling with the modern living environment that the human body is in?
Yeah, so this has been something, you know, that's really been going on in the last 75 years since World War II, with accelerated industrial agriculture and, you know, ultra processing of food, ingestion of chemicals, poisons, pesticides, antibiotics. I mean, there's been a constant assault on the integrity of this, you know, what we call an ecosystem. It's a very complex ecosystem. And the reason that we haven't developed more problems is because any ecosystem is stable and resilient to change. Despite all these onslaughts of all these negative things, you know, that we have lost some microbial strains and species permanently. So if you look at the curves, you know, what has happened to our diversity, it has continued to decrease in the last 75 years and is continuing to decrease, with many of the things continuing unabated, you know, these influences that I mentioned. And so that has a couple of consequences. One is it does contribute, it makes us more susceptible, for example, to viral infections, because one major function of an ecosystem is its resilience and its defense against invaders, pathological invaders. Another thing is, if this happens early in life, there's an altered interaction of the immune system with the evolving, you know, microbiome, and so the immune system is less able to learn how to differentiate between good and bad. So the cause of the autoimmune, the you know, epidemic of autoimmune diseases and food sensitivities. So all these things, you know, happen so you don't need the leaky gut syndrome to explain those. And there's concepts now about, you know, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease. There's many mechanisms. I think the most likely is it's a combination of that leaky gut and the inflammation with these other signaling molecules that our altered gut microbiome produces.
What do you think is causing a leaky gut? So you talked about the microbes not being prolific because of the environment that is going on in the gut, the ecosystem. What do you think opens those junctions up?
Yeah, so the junctions really are opened by, you know, inflammatory molecules, cytokines, that the immune cells that are located in our gut, just underneath the surface, that they produce. And the mechanism that, you know, the way it works is there's a subclass of these immune cells, the dendritic cells. Their extensions reach into the gut lumen, into the mucus layer. And if any microbe gets close enough to those extensions, to the receptors, these toll-like receptors, then that dendritic cell is activated, produces cytokines. The cytokines affect the other immune cells. And then the immune cells together, you know, there's many of these cytokines, then act on these tight junctions and loosen them. So and the inflammation that goes on in that area, you know, loosens these tight junctions, and it's sort of like opening the floodgates to the actual microbes, the intact microbes, you know, that. And what's dangerous about that is, I mean, the cell membrane of microbes has molecules. It's made out of molecules like LPS is one of the best known lipopolysaccharide. Another group of molecules are so-called MAMPs, MAMPS, and they act on these specific receptors on immune cells, on these toll-like receptors, TLRs. And when that happens, in the gut, or then once these cell wall components are in the circulation, it happens everywhere they go, and it's so then all of a sudden our fat tissue turns into an immune organ because it gets inflamed and produces more cytokines. Same in the liver, this NAFL, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, is a similar mechanism that immune activation plays a role in creating changes in the liver that causes inflammation, and so it's almost like a contagion within the body, and it starts. The floodgates are in the gut, and I think we know that process now pretty well, how that starts.
You're talking a lot about a cytokine storm, and I'm thinking, that was a term or cytokines, that was a term that I feel like the world learned last year. And do you think there's the possibility that this cytokine storm was already going on inside many humans' guts, and then when they came in contact with COVID, they created this hyperactive immune response because they already had a low-level cytokine storm going on?
Yeah, so I think to say, in general, I mean, most of these problems we're dealing with today are some form of a hyperactivity of the immune system. So in allergies, it's against substances that we shouldn't be allergic to. We shouldn't have a reaction of our immune system. Same thing with autoimmune diseases. Our immune system should not attack our own body cells. And with the cytokine storm, that's just the last, the last example. And there's a very complex balance in the gut between there's certain cytokines like IL-10 produced by a subset of immune cells called the Treg cells. And that IL-10 is anti-inflammatory. So if there's an imbalance between the IL-10 and the other pro-inflammatory cytokines, then you have a state of enhanced inflammation potential. And if that was present in people, it's sort of hard to say retroactively, because so we don't have data on all the people that develop COVID, even though on some of them, so there will be studies coming out on that topic, because on some of the patients that later developed or died or developed long COVID, there were blood samples available from before they fell ill. But the general concept is that anybody who has any of these what's called non-infectious chronic diseases, so they make up our chronic disease epidemic, heart disease, colon cancer, Alzheimer's, metabolic syndrome, diabetes. There's a whole range of these diseases, and they often co-occur in the same patient. Risk factors are obesity and an unhealthy diet, and and metabolic dysregulation. And this kind of breaks down people in lower socioeconomic parts of our country are more likely to have these diseases for a variety of reasons. Less access to healthcare, unhealthy diet, probably the main thing. And so this group of society has been by far at increased risk to develop, not only to develop regular, COVID-19 infection, but also the more severe forms and this cytokine storm. And it's sort of, it's kind of interesting. I always thought, so if you look at populations around the world who have the healthiest gut microbiome, the most diverse and the richest, it's populations that live on the Orinoco River in Brazil and Venezuela. And so I have a particular interest in those because during my college time, I was fortunate to be on a film expedition to these people. And unfortunately, they're particularly susceptible, but this is something else because they've never been exposed to many of our viruses and infectious diseases. It's just the same as with, indigenous populations everywhere in the US as well, that when, Europeans came they died, rapidly from these infections. So this is, so the microbiome cannot apparently protect you against those kind of, cannot protect you from this. There must be other factors. As I said, if a population has never been exposed to Western infectious diseases, then the immune system just doesn't know how to react to them.
I was going to say, is that a training of the immune system? There's a lot of talk about how we really enhance our immune system by small doses of exposure to a variety of bacteria and viruses. So when I hear you talk about that, I'm wondering if they're just exposed to different viruses, different bacteria, so they're not getting the more Western infections. And maybe if you plopped them in New York in 2019, they may have been better prepared to handle the virus.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing, because the training, what you call the training of the immune system, the optimal training seems to require infections, chronic infections with organisms and parasites that are not very dangerous, that you can live with.
Right.
And so many of these indigenous people, they have these infections, but their immune system gets used to that. And so, but if they're exposed to something that comes from the outside, that's not part of their natural environment, then they're even more vulnerable than people in the US with a compromised microbiome.
Yeah. How much do you think the standard American diet is contributing to our deficient microbiome?
A lot, I would say. I would say that if I had to single out one factor, it would probably top the list. And that also is relatively simply explained by that, our diet has lost in diversity. First of all, it's lost in the components of plant-based foods in general, and replace it with animal-based products. Secondly, the diversity of these plant-based foods has gone down dramatically. The types of grains or the types of beans or anything, has gone down from hundreds to less than a handful. And so even if somebody eats a healthy diet, largely plant-rich in vegetables and fruits, they'll get a much smaller variety of these plant-based molecules, which are essential for the diversity of the microbiome. And the two categories are the fiber on the one side, it's not just one type of molecule. There's hundreds of different types of chemical structures that make up these fibers from different. And then the other group of molecules are these polyphenols or antioxidants that are these large molecules, again, that you need the microbes to break them down. So if you reduce the diversity of the plant-based foods that you ingest, you also greatly reduce the amount of these microbe-targeted food items, and so the microbes are starving. On top of that, what's happened with the ultra-processed food, we don't leave even that reduced diversity of food. We don't leave alone, so we process and over-process it, and to a degree that many of these large molecules are broken down and absorbed in the small intestine. So they no longer go down into the large intestine. So we really have been starving our microbiome. I mean, that's, that. And that process has been going on ever since humans invented cooking. I've forgotten how long this goes back, probably more than 100,000 years. But initially, this wasn't as extreme as it is now. I think there's definitely been an exponential increase of this processing, ultra processing in the last 50, 75 years, because food companies, in combination with industrial agriculture, I mean, this goes hand in hand, industrial agriculture produces these monocultures of crops because it's cheaper to produce. And then the food industry takes these and over processes them to take out even the good parts out of these foods, and adds adds sugar to it and takes out fiber. And you can almost go to a market, and if you look for natural high fiber foods, so the white rice is still considered the best one. Pasta, the pasta that you get now in Italian restaurant is almost devoid of fiber. So most things that in industrialized societies and in the standard American diet, well, potatoes is another example. Potatoes are now optimized for making French fries, and those potatoes have a very low fiber content compared to sweet potatoes, for example. Which are staple food of the
my favorite food. That's my favorite food.
Yeah.
Literally.
Well, you're in that, you're totally conscious in that space, but you're not representative for the majority.
So would the number one thing we could do to feed our microbiome be fiber?
Fiber and these polyphenols. So polyphenols are these large molecules, they cannot be absorbed in the small intestine. They are part of every fruit, highest in berries, all kinds of berries.
Red wine.
Red wine. Even though, red wine is not on the top of the list of these, it's always sort of been used as the example of polyphenols, but there are many other things, particularly, I would say, berries, nuts, and seeds that have higher, and just about any vegetable has it. Okay. And again, there's not just one, there's hundreds, probably thousands of different molecules. And so why is it so important when I emphasize, that diversity of fiber and polyphenols? Because many microbes are specialists. They don't digest any kind of fiber. They specialize on certain types of fiber, certain types of polyphenols. And so if you feed them this large variety, you force the system to add on other specialists that can help, and you expand, the ecosystem of that food process, this endogenous food processing system in your gut, and so. And if you do this, I think you asked that before, if you do this today, so obviously our diversity and richness has gone down a lot, continues to go down. And you could say, well, it's too late. So, maybe some of these strains have gone extinct. So why should I pay much attention to this? Well, before they go into extinction, as we know from macro ecosystems like the jungle, so before a species goes into existence, goes into being totally eliminated, it goes through a stage where it's almost undetectable, but there's still a very low level of those organisms present. So now if you bring in this food, you nurture and you grow back, like a gardener, you bring back things that have not been doing well. And if you're lucky, there's enough left of them that, they come back.
They resurge.
So you can restore your ecosystem.
We've done thousands of gut tests on our resetters, and not one, I kid you not one. I think I had maybe a little bit of an inkling of one in a child, but not one had enough diversity. The test came back that their microbe diversity was very low, and they had created this monoculturing of their microbiome. Do you think that's because we tend to eat the same foods over and over and over again? Is it because if I'm eating the standard American diet, I'm always eating the standard American diet? If I love sweet potatoes, I'm always eating sweet potatoes. What is it that we can do to really improve the diversity? Do we need to buy from different farms all the time? How do we get that diversity up?
No, if you rotate, first of all, I think you have to become aware of the problem. It's not. For sure. You can be a vegetarian by just eating pizza, but that's not going to good for your health.
Said.
And it's the same. You can be a vegetarian just eating carrots. And it's not going to, particularly carrots that have been, selected from hundreds of different types of carrots. to the one that has the most sugar in it, because that's the tastiest, you know.
Yes.
So as much as different types, you can use seasons to influence that process. You know, you get different varieties, particularly so in California, we overcome this obviously by having everything available all the time, but not in all, not in all parts of the country, not all parts of the world. So you can rotate them seasonally, and we know that that's a good thing for microbes. The ones that don't get enough of the variety, so we know this from studies in Africa, amongst people at the Hadza, people that sort of the descendants of or the last remnants of hunter-gatherers. So they have this seasonal food supply, and they have a season where the diversity of their food intake goes way down, as does the diversity of the microbes, and the molecules that the microbes produce just goes down to almost a level that's comparable to our standard American diet situation. The difference is when they then go into another season, they all come back. So they don't go extinct, they just are suppressed to a very low level. And so clearly, you may not have access to all the same fresh vegetables in wintertime, many parts of the US, as you have in the summer. And so this is something, another thing is just going to, if you know the source, where and how it's grown has also a big influence. So the polyphenol content, for example, is dependent on the health of the soil and the microbes in the soil. So if this food is grown, and there's a big discussion about this aquaponics, that this could allow us to double, triple our food supplies, but they're grown in waters, and they're no longer the roots are no longer in soil and not exposed to the microbes. So these foods have a much lower concentration of these health beneficial molecules. So you want to know exactly where it comes from, how is it grown? Is it grown in an organic fashion, or in better regenerative organic fashion? So get to know your farmer is what I heard. What do you think? I'm curious what you think about fasting, because I have this new aha, since we have a tremendous amount of people in our community that fast together, that chronic disease is coming from the standard American diet, but getting everybody from the standard American diet to the whole foods diet, it could be expensive. But what if we got everybody to fast? The research that I see on fasting shows that you can repair the microbiome. Everybody can afford to fast. What are your thoughts on fasting for repairing this? Yeah, this is really interesting. To date, there's been 30 years of preclinical research on fasting in mouse models, and shown that it increases longevity. When I was still in college, I remember once visiting a lab at UCLA that, somebody did studies. It was a famous guy. Somebody did studies in fasting mice, and they lived, 20% longer and stayed healthy. So we've known this for a long time in animals. I have done animal studies in the past. I've become a big skeptic of the translatability of, you can show anything in a mouse that you cannot reproduce in humans, because of the different genes and the heterogeneity, and there's many factors. But there's some evidence, that fasting has benefits on metabolism, for sure, on metabolic syndrome. There's also some really interesting data on one form. I don't really call it fasting, but it's included in these intermittent fasting categories. The time restricted eating. Mm-hmm. I find that particularly attractive for two reasons. One, it's practical. Anybody can do this. Exactly. To compress the time when you eat to 8 hours a day or less. So we've been doing it during the pandemic and have not really felt that this is incompatible with a normal lifestyle. So there are fascinating studies that during that, I mean, two things happen. One is if no food is in your GI tract, then it switches, the entire function of your GI tract switches to a different pattern. It switches from these unique contractions that you have when food is in there, peristaltic reflex and mixing and grinding, and it goes to a very different clockwork kind of pattern that every 90 minutes you have this big contractile wave going through from your esophagus to the end of your intestine, which moves everything with it, including microbes, removing them from areas where they don't belong to, like this, the first part of the small intestine.
Yeah, SIBO stuff, yeah.
So one of the things that protects us against SIBO is this, what's called the migrating motor complex of the GI tract during fasting. For most people, that pattern has been reduced to the time that they sleep, even though in other cultures, so I'm coming back to these indigenous people on the Orinoco River, that sort of, they don't munch or eat throughout the day. They don't even have time because they're walking outside or go hunting. But they sleep there 12 hours from sundown to sun up. And so they have at least 12 hours, absolutely nothing in the stomach. And then, unfortunately, at the time when I was there, I was not aware of all these questions. I would love to go there now and test all these theories. But in the West, so we have even the nighttime we have encroached upon with food. There's snacks after dinner and a glass of wine after dinner, and then for many people a big breakfast and early breakfast because they have to commute, get up at 5 o'clock. And then there are these people that pride themselves that they only need to sleep 4 hours and then they can walk again with something in their stomach. So all this has sort of encroached on this time that our GI tract is in this cleansing fashion. So that's one. At the same time, secretions into the gut go along with this cyclical pattern. And what we know recently is that what's called the geography of the microbes in relation to the gut. So they are, the distance of microbes to the gut lining changes if you are fasting or if you're eating something. And so you basically change the whole interactions that your microbes have with your immune system and other cells in the gut just by having a long period where no food gets there. And then there's the metabolic thing, as that our body then switches to this burning ketones for energy.
Yep.
And I mean, that clearly happens to a certain degree during this prolonged period without food in the stomach. And you can even extend it by when you have your first meal. So we do it, for example, at noon to have the first meal, to make this consisting of, I would say plant-based keto. So it's nuts and seeds and no easily digestible carbs, no sugar. So you can extend that period where there's no sugar to burn even longer than these 16 hours.
Yeah, you're talking my language now. That's exactly what I always say is what you break your fast with will determine if the benefits continue on. So what I hear you saying is if you break it with something plant-based, something fibery, you're feeding the microbiome that is ultimately going to help your metabolism.
Yeah, and that first meal of the day, is pretty high in plant-based fats, the nuts and seeds and the things that we put in there. So it's essentially it's polyphenols, fat, and fiber, and no sugar and no. That's obviously another thing we haven't talked about. Why is the diet so unhealthy? I mean, the excessive amount of sugar, not just adding the sugar to your cup of coffee, but the hidden sugar in high fructose corn syrup
Yep.
being just in any kind of food that you consume is has been shown to be bad for a microbial system and for gut health. So there's no question. So yeah.
Well, that's why I actually have this vision. One of my missions for 2021 has been to get 1 million people fasting, because I believe it's the quickest way out of this chronic disease problem. The food industry has trained our taste buds. They've destroyed our gut, like you're commenting. And yet not everybody has the resources, the financial resources to walk into Whole Foods, but everybody has the financial resources to fast. Mm-hmm. So they just need to know how to do it. And the science is very compelling as to what it does for the microbiome, both in mouse studies, but also in human studies. How long do you think it takes to change your gut? Because that's the other question that a lot of our community has asked us. If you're listening to this, you're like, oh man, I messed up. I've been eating the standard American diet. Now I need to start to change. How does it take? Days, weeks, years?
Well, there are these studies, the early quite famous studies where people were switched from a vegetarian to a keto diet. And it switched within 48 hours.
I've heard that.
Yeah. So yeah, the adaptability is pretty high. I mean, the microbes, they have millions of genes, many more than we humans have. No, the adaptability is pretty remarkable. And it's also important to realize, we talked about this earlier, so some of this diversity has fallen by the roadside with over the last 75 years. You won't bring those back, but you can bring back the ones that are at a very low level, on this almost undetectable. So, and there's a lot of those, and you can actually add quite a bit of diversity and richness and abundance to you, even if your system is compromised.
Yeah, which is really encouraging, because I mean, again, this is what I love about fasting is it's the ultimate reset. You can start to repair the body. The human body is so inclined to repair. And it's not, but you're dealing with human cells, and we have more bacterial cells than we have human cells. So I've always wondered if it is the bacteria is as adaptable or more adaptable. It sounds like they may be more adaptable than human cells.
Yeah, I mean, the microbes are much more adaptable. And, what we see with these, it's sort of hard for people to think about it this way. The reason we have this chronic health crisis now, chronic disease crisis, it's because our food supply and the environmental factors and lifestyle factors have changed rapidly during the last 75 years. The microbes were able to adapt quickly to this in a way that, it's a reduced diversity. They don't need that many players because there's much less fiber coming in and much less. So if you just look at it from the microbe standpoint, they have adapted to this new situation. Mm-hmm. But our gut has not. So now you have a mismatch between these altered microbial communities in our gut system. Because our gut system is determined by our 20,000 genes. And this mismatch between these two systems is probably the reason why we get the immune activation. Like immune activation is always like a warning sign that something bad goes on. And yep. So yeah, you can look at our current crisis as the warning lights have gone on to tell us that something negative has been happening, to the outside, and the microbes, they will continue to adapt. I mean, if it couldn't be if we stay at our current, standard American diet, as some people have said this in theory, hopefully it won't happen. But if we stayed on this for like 15,000 years, I don't think humans would survive that. But if you stayed on it, there would be enough time for the genes to adapt, for the human genes. So then potentially would actually get less inflammation because now our GI tract has adapted to it. It sounds kind of interesting, but I think people have always realized microbes are extremely smart. It's the most abundant and the most adaptable, and I would even dare to say the most intelligent life form on Earth. It's spatially distributed. It's not in the brain concentrated, but it's a brain that surrounds the whole world. You know, it's a network of cells that surrounds the whole world and interact with each other. So I look at this as, and you know, microbes have survived any major cataclysmic events, like the extinction. True. Five mass extinctions. Microbes have always survived because they are better in adapting, you know, to extreme changes in the environment.
I love this conversation. I'm so grateful that you wrote 2 books. I know your new one coming out is The Gut Immune, but your first one was a gut brain, right? Gut mind.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think both of these are incredible topics. So how do people find you? Where can they go? Can they pre-order your book on Amazon? Where are you located?
Yeah. So the first thing is, so this is the new book, which comes out in 1 week.
Ah, exciting.
And they can pre-order it from any bookseller now. And so the best way is to go to my website, emeranmayer.com, which will give you information. So one is you can sign up for a newsletter that we have, the Mind-Gut Conversation, which deals with many topics of the mind-gut diet system. But they, you know, also can go to all the social media channels and we're present on all of them. So I think going to the website, signing up for the newsletter would probably be the first step.
Good starting spot. Yeah. Awesome. Well, okay. I have 5 rapid fire questions for you that are unique to you. So my first one, and I'm really curious about this, what do you feel like is the greatest health habit that you personally do to support a healthy microbiome?
I would say it's adhering to an emphasis is on largely plant-based diet, and paying attention to where this diet where the food comes from, how is it grown, and when do I eat it? So this is, I would say, the main thing.
Love it. Okay, what book or person really influenced you the most? You have a very interesting story of going from a more traditional medical practice into this more functional world. What was there a book? Was there a person? What influenced your obsession or your desire to understand the microbiome at the level that you are educating people on?
So to be honest, it was really writing my first book and being asked by publishers and agents if I would want to write this book like 6 years ago. That has taken me on a path that was very different from what I had been on. And if I had to identify one individual, it's the owner and founder of Patagonia.
Nice.
Yvon Chouinard, who is a visionary, in my opinion, you know, having gone from an extreme rock climber to somebody who is mainly concerned about, you know, the environment. And his main thing is sustainable organic agriculture with all the health consequences that this has. So yeah, I've had to identify one individual, and there's many others, you know, that have come up in the meantime, that have approached me or that I have learned at meetings that are not part of the traditional gastroenterology community.
Love it.
And it's been wonderful. I mean, it's really been a wonderful thing.
Yeah, we're huge fans of Patagonia. We try to purchase their clothing. They have a food line that's come out. Just support him in any way possible because he's doing incredible work in the world. So here's a really interesting thought that I keep thinking, if we had people like you in the positions like the Surgeon General, what would last year have looked? How could that have looked different? So if you were a Surgeon General right now and you were instructed to clean up the health of America, what would you do?
Well, I mean, it's a difficult one. I think that question is more relevant now for the Surgeon General to prevent that this is going to happen again. And you know, because once the pandemic started, obviously it was an extreme emergency situation. You know, this could have this, if you didn't have the vaccine, it would have knocked out millions of people in the US. It would still be ongoing, raging now. And so I would say the main thing that I would do now is really I mean, this sounds kind of crazy of having been a scientist, an NIH-funded scientist all my career. I think people should think about put more money into lifestyle modification,
yes,
starting in kindergarten, and then in finding out, which molecule does a particular thing, because that research benefits ultimately primarily the pharmaceutical industry, who's going to make tons of money with it. I think if you change the lifestyle, and that would involve exercise, diet, sleep, hygiene. So there's a whole range. I mean, you could have a whole course in school, or in
Yes, you could.
preschool.
Yes, you could. And you should.
Yeah, you should, and teaching the kids and the mothers. It should be friendly. So.
Yes. I always say that there is traditional medicine, there's alternative medicine, and then there's lifestyle medicine. And I feel like we need to start with lifestyle. And if we do, then to your point, we don't need as many supplements. We don't need as many medications. We really have it backwards. We go to the pills first, whether they're natural or chemical based, and then we try to fix the lifestyle second. We should flip that on its head and start with lifestyle first.
And it's also something, it's a little bit of a detour, but I sort of love this idea. I've recently written this blog post for our newsletter, which came out today, about this whole revolution that's going on in psychiatry with the psychedelics. And
it's getting a lot of traction.
Plant-based molecules, I think we've come to a point now that with a healthy diet, we bank on plant-based molecules, the polyphenols and the fiber. And now in psychiatry, we bank on another group of molecules that also plants are producing. And it's
amazing.
It's sort of, I wouldn't be surprised if we're on the verge of moving away from this total focus on chemical interventions that
I hope so.
That is sort of like the last resort, because we don't know what goes on before that, what leads to this. So I think we can learn a lot from the plants and the microbes. I think that very smart life forms.
Have you read the book Overstory?
I've not read it.
Oh, you have to read it. A friend recommended it to me, and it's about how trees communicate with each other through the roots and through microbes. But it's told in like a story. It's really good. So you would like it with your passion for microbes and nature and plants.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. Okay, last question. If you had one message for the world that you could get into everybody's brain and get everybody to understand, what would that be?
That is a tough one, Yeah, I mean, the one message would be that I've been promoting also in my last book, in my new book, is adhere to the One Health concept. Understand, grasp the interconnectedness of healthy systems. Be it in your gut, be it in your body, be it in the plants, in the soil, and being on the planet in general, because they're all interconnected. And there's if you probe into it, you'll be surprised how close these interactions really are. So if you want to fix one, I think you should address the whole package. Yeah. And I think we can do this today.
Agreed.
I don't know if you can do it politically, but we certainly can do it scientifically.